Good morning, Pa. All right, away we go. Last time we were learning about how there was a bunch of prophets from the Old Testament that are sneaking around in the Book of Mormon, but they're not specifically called out, such as Micah and Hosea, and if not them, at least their information. And again, we keep finding that these prophets are being stoned and killed for believing in the mortal, corporeal Messiah. But we'll see that Hosea was the rare exception. So, bloody breadcrumbs is where we left. As we piece together all these accounts, a pattern begins to emerge. Prophets tell about the Messiah. The false prophets reject the teaching. The records are purged, and only traces of the prophecies about the Messiah are left. Isaiah wasn't the biggest and best messianic prophet. He was just very, very good at shrouding his prophecies in poetry that the scribes didn't catch. Yet even all that encoding didn't save him from martyrdom. Isaiah was martyred for blaspheming against the Trinity, just like this book would later be rejected from the canon by Christians for blaspheming against the Trinity. Whew, the irony there is thick. But, like ancient ransom notes, these brave men left behind breadcrumbs to follow. Isaiah writes, "This is a rebellious people, lying children that will not hear the law of the Lord, which says to the seers, 'See not,' and to the prophets, 'Prophesy not unto us right things. Speak unto us smooth things. Prophesy deceits.'" Isaiah 30, 9 through 10. The next time someone complains about reading complex Isaiah, which is about every 3 seconds, just remember that it's complicated for a very good reason. Don't demand smoothness like the wicked scribes did. Micah also tells us he was being censored. "Prophesy ye not, say they to them that prophesy. They shall not prophesy to them, that they shall not take shame." Amos was shown the door. "O thou seer, go, flee. Flee thee away in the land of Judah, and there eat bread and prophesy there. Now therefore hear thou the word of the Lord. Thou sayest, Prophesy not against Israel, and drop not thy word against the house of Isaac." Amos 7, 12, and 16. Suddenly Lehi's story doesn't look so strange. Indeed, it looks almost typical. Powerful factions of anti-messianic scribes and false prophets actively campaign to suppress prophecies about the Anointed One. Expurgating, that's a new word for me, expurgating, which looks like expurging or expurgating whole books, but also removing one line here and one line there from the prophets that remained. To all our detriment, the censors succeeded. The circle of prophets around Isaiah, or the prophets of old, a century before Lehi, were persecuted, killed, exiled, and erased. The brass plates were the escape pod containing those censored messianic prophecies, and we know what was in the escape pod, because some of those prophecies made it into the Book of Mormon and the Apocrypha. The sting of death. If only these brave martyrs had heard Paul's beautiful poetry about Christ, in which he says, "Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory?" 1 Corinthians 15:55. Think what a strength that would have been for Isaiah as he was being sawn in twain for his telling the truth about the Son of God. Sadly, this stanza by Paul was written almost a millennium after Isaiah was dead. Or was it? Jonah has this wonderful way of doing things. Or was it? Anyways, one thing that sends critics howling with laughter at the Book of Mormon was this is alleged anachronisms. For example, the sting of death stanza by Paul was traditionally thought to have been written around 55 AD. Ha 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 ha. But Honey Badger Book of Mormon don't care. The Book of Mormon is going to quote it wherever and whatever it it's going to quote it wherever and whenever it wants. 200 years before Paul, and a hemisphere away, Abinadi pops up in Noah's court and quotes the Pauline sting of death prophecy. This, in his parting sermon, he quotes Isaiah extensively, but he also tells the wicked that priests that Christ will rise from the dead and break the bands of death, that the grave should have no victory, and that death should have no sting. That's Mosiah 16:7. And here is, what is this? Another silly mistake by that forger Joseph Smith Jr. Ha! But Joseph doesn't learn his lesson. Later, Aaron says the same thing. He breaks the band of death, that the grave shall have no victory, and that the sting of death should be swallowed up in the hopes of glory. Alma 22:14. Never able to get too much of a good thing, Joseph has the prophet Mormon use precisely the same language. He hath gained the victory over the grave, and also in him is the sting of death swallowed up. Joseph didn't slip up once. He tripled down on these American prophets, using the same imagery as Paul. None of these dudes could possibly have access to Paul's letter. Paul lived over a century after Abinadi and Aaron, and a hemisphere away from Mormon. Mormon would have needed the world's best carrier pigeon, and others would have needed time machines. That is, unless they all drew from a source document that was rejected by the canonizers. So it happens that the apocryphal Gospel of Nicodemus contained a lost prophecy of Isaiah, which doesn't appear in the Bible. In Nicodemus, while the prophets are rehearsing their prophecies to John the Baptist, the spirit of the prophet Isaiah proclaims, quote, "And thereafter, in like manner, Isaiah said, Did not I, when I was alive on earth, foretell unto you, the dead shall arise? And again I said, O death, where is thy sting? O hell, where is thy victory? When they heard that of Isaiah, all the saints said unto hell, Open thy gates." That's Nicodemus 5:1. The crux of this passage is that Isaiah is credited with making this prophecy. He is declaring himself the originator of it. This isn't a passing comment. Claiming ownership is the point of the whole passage. Nicodemus is emphatically declaring that Isaiah was the source of the sting metaphor, not Paul. If Nicodemus is to be believed, then this supposed anachronism in the Book of Mormon is not a mistake at all. Instead, it seems Paul was quoting Isaiah, who wrote a millennium earlier, when the brass plates would have recorded his prophecies and passed them to the Nephites. It is further evidence that the brass plates contained apocryphal prophecies missing from the Old Testament. Abinadi was more loyal to Isaiah than we thought. Even when it seemed he was straying, he wasn't. Paul and Abinadi and Aaron and Mormon were all quoting from a portion of Isaiah that is missing from the traditional canon. How much faith does it take to feel flames licking your flesh and still declare that death has no sting? And how fitting for Isaiah, who suffered a death so horrific, it's difficult to read without wincing. How fitting that Isaiah should mock death by asking, "Where is thy sting?" Because he has such faith in the coming salvation of the Messiah he died for. The brass plates restore Isaiah's full sacrifice. As revealed by the Apocrypha, Lehi was correct that the prophets of old had been cast out and slain. Perhaps the critics would be easier on Lehi if they remembered that Jesus himself said the same thing. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, which killest the prophets and stonest them that are sent unto thee. Killing the ancient prophets was their first crime. Destroying the evidence was the second. But the evidence remains in three places: the Apocrypha, the Book of Mormon, and the words of the Lord himself. It makes one wonder which other anachronisms aren't actually anachronisms, but are instead evidence supporting the historicity of the Book of Mormon. Alma, son of Abinadi. There's always the possibility that Abinadi was taught by an angel, but he doesn't talk like that. He says, "Behold, I say unto you, that whosoever has heard the words of the prophets, yea, all the holy prophets who have prophesied concerning the coming of the Lord," see Mosiah 15:11. This sounds like someone who has read ancient prophecies from the brass plates. This gives us a clue to another secret custodian of the plates. If Abinadi was quoting from apocryphal sermons that were contained on the brass plates, he must have heard it from somewhere. But sadly, no one in Abinadi's community had access to the plates. This splinter group was broken off from the main body of Nephites with Zeniff, and the plates stayed behind. You can see Omni for that. Then how could Abinadi know? Formally, we know almost nothing about Abinadi. He parachutes into the Book of Mormon like a bolt from the blue. No background is given, but he might be giving himself away by quoting from the holy relics in the keeping of the Nephite royalty. With this in mind, the very last verse of Omni might provide a clue. Just as King Noah's people are splitting off from the main body of the Nephites, Amaleki writes, he had a brother who also went with them, and I have not known since concerning them. Amaleki doesn't name his brother, so it's impossible to be sure. But Amaleki's brother would have had direct personal contact with the brass plates as his father, and both were custodians thereof. If someone in Noah's community was quoting from the brass plates, this mystery brother would be a good candidate. Could Abinadi be Amaleki's long-lost brother? I always thought of it as Zeniff, but maybe. But he said he went with him. Yeah. Another clue that supports this theory is in the names. Before Amaleki tells us his unnamed brother snuck off with Noah's people, he mentions that he is the son of Abinadom, a Nephite king. Etymologists propose that Abinadom could break out into Hebrew as Abai, meaning father, Nad, meaning here, and Om, meaning to gather, or community. Together the name could mean father is with us, or something like that. The name Abinadi would shorten that to father is with me. But whatever the names mean, Abinadi might as well be a junior to Abinadom. The names could hardly be closer. To sum up, King Abinadom kept the plates and had a mystery son sneak off with Noah's people. Years later, a man named Abinadi turns up among Noah's people and quotes from the plates. One last clue buttresses the theory of Abinadi's royal lineage. 20 years or so after his death, Abinadi is mourned by the sons of Mosiah, Ammon, Omner, Aaron, and Himni. Quote, "Yet Ammon and his brethren were filled with sorrow, because so many of their brethren had been slain, and also that King Noah and his priests had caused the people to commit so many sins and iniquities against God, and they also did mourn for the death of Abinadi." Moses 21, 29 through 30. Well, this is odd, considering that Ammon, Omner, and Aaron and Himni share no relation to Abinadi at all, and could only have known about him through the story told by the survivors of King Noah's community. Really, Alma was the only one qualified to tell of Abinadi's final testament and martyrdom, and he wasn't even around yet. The princes of Mosiah only heard about Abinadi's second hand from Limhi. So why the mourning for long-deceased vagrant preacher. If Abinadi were a prince from the line of Nephi, and if he were the rightful heir to the plates after Amaleki ended up childless, then Abinadi's death would have meant the severing of the Nephite royal line. Amaleki was forced to transfer the plates to righteous King Benjamin, the prince's grandfather, imbuing his line with kingly authority from Nephi. The sons of Mosiah had their kingship bolstered by Amaleki's bequeathal of the brass plates. This doubly royal bestowal was only possible because Abinadi vanished a generation before. For decades, no one knew whether Abinadi, the last Nephite prince, was dead or alive. The death of their last heir to the Nephite line would have been a cause for great mourning among the fellow royal sons of Mosiah. A royal house had fallen because it preached the truth of the brass plates. The trail isn't hard to follow. It fits that Abinadi was probably the long-lost prince of Nephite royalty who ventured out with King Noah's tribe. He brought with him the hopes of the Nephites, as well as a first-hand knowledge of the sting of death prophecy from the brass plates. His death was a monumental tragedy. Somehow, Abinadi, the heir to the plates, who never kept them, and Alma, the keeper of the plates, who was never heir to them, were in that fateful room together before King Noah executed the last rightful heir, to the Nephite crown. As the last dying heir to his royal bloodline, Abinadi shares a poignant verse paraphrasing Isaiah before his death. Quote, "And now I say unto you, who shall declare his generation? Behold, I say unto you, that when his soul has been made an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. And now what say ye? And who shall be his seed?" Mosiah 15:10. Also compare Isaiah 53:8. Isaiah was also murdered for his prophecies, surrounded by lesser prophets he hoped would carry on the message. How can one appreciate Isaiah's prophecies about Christ's sacrifice if they don't know that Isaiah was writing them while facing the same gruesome fate? Abinadi chose the perfect inspiration for his last sermon. Keep in mind that the line of kings was about to go up in smoke. Preaching his last, Abinadi quotes the martyred Isaiah and calls on the metaphor of Christ's death to ask, who shall declare his generation? Or in other words, who will be his seed? His heirs. Like his childless brother, Abinadi was likely dying without any children. Footnote, otherwise, where did his children go? There's no sign of a contender for Limhi's throne when Gideon sent men into the wilderness secretly to search for the king. That's Mosiah 19:18. He didn't go searching for the line of Abinadom. Who would be Abinadi's heir? As Alma listened from the priestly chair, Abinadi answered his own question. Behold, I say unto you, that whosoever has heard the words of the prophets, I say unto you, that these are his seed, or they are the heirs of the kingdom of God. For these are they whose sins he has borne. These are they for whom he has died, to redeem them from their transgressions. And now are they not his seed? Yea, and are not the prophets, every one that has opened his mouth to prophesy, that has not fallen into transgression? I mean all the holy prophets, ever since the world began. I say unto you, that they are his seed. Mosiah 15:11-13. The Apocalypse of Elijah puts it simply, become sons to him, since he is a father to you. Every one who will obey me will receive thrones and crowns among those who are mine. All the more fitting that Alma should receive the inheritance of the dead line of kings, as he heard the words of the prophet, and so became Abinadi's seed. The line of Nephite rulers was born from Abinadi's ashes to rise anew as a reign of judges under a chief priest, Alma. As Jesus would later put it, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. Isaiah sacrificed his life to prophesy the truth about the Messiah. Abinadi sacrificed his life to keep Isaiah's prophecy alive. He did more to pass on the Nephite heritage than all the faithful custodians mentioned in the book of Omni. The unbearable truth about Gentiles. Oh, that's another one that is going to get the goat of those who are in the way of the scribes. Whew. You know what they always say, it's hard to see the bright side in being stoned to death. But at least Isaiah's friends got their names into the canon. At least they had some prophecies that survived, either because they were broaching less sensitive topics, or they were less offensive, or because they were so incredibly poetic that it takes a master's degree in Hebrew to decode what the heck they were saying. I'm looking at you, Isaiah. Hannah and I just barely squeaked in, but people actually know of and even name their children after Micah or Isaiah. Sorry, Habakkuk. We like you, but your parents were crazy. Other prophets never had anything make the final cut. Their names have been completely forgotten for over 2 millennia until the brass plates brought them back. According to the Book of Mormon, the brass plates contained a number of prophets and prophecies that were ultimately lost to the Old Testament. The words these prophets died for were stolen away by Lehi into the wilderness, where they'd be safe. Meanwhile, the prophecies of Zenos, Zenock, Nahum, and others were expunged from the Bible completely. There were 2 doctrines that drove the censors crazy, and the Messiah was absolutely one of them. The other was equally hated, and that was the unbearable truth about the Gentiles. The idea that other peoples were just as worthy to try out God's covenants was an idea impossible for the censors to deal with. It had to be stamped out. The changes of the 7th and 6th centuries BC had thoroughly saturated Judaism by the time John and Jesus arrived. Jonah had taken the covenant to the Gentiles, so his book had to be butchered, which is why Jonah is such a bizarre and confusing book. Anything that didn't declare the superiority of the sons of Abraham had to be removed. What was left in the canon was a strong nationalistic and exclusivist gospel. Jesus dealt with this silly notion up front and almost got stoned for it after Jesus said, "If a man keep my sayings, he shall never see death." The heirs of the Deuteronomist immediately thought of Abraham. "Abraham is dead, and the prophets. Art thou greater than our father Abraham, which is dead? And the prophets are dead. Whom makest thou thyself?" John 8:52-53. The Jews of around 30 AD are saying, if righteous people don't die, then how come Abraham died, huh, smarty pants? Jesus replies, "Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Before Abraham was, I am." Then the outraged doctors and lawyers decided to try and stone Jesus on the spot. Yeah, that's John 8:56-59. Right before our eyes, Jesus is referring to the great forsakening. He's citing scripture that the Pharisees should know, but that has been lost. Abraham saw my day? When did he see that? Jesus is either lying or the canon is lying. This conversation further reveals the 2 insidious philosophies of the Deuteronomistic legacy: anti-messianism and racism. Jesus claims that Abraham saw the day of the coming Messiah and rejoiced at it. These Pharisees should know this, but they don't. Then the appeal to their ancestry. Righteousness isn't about keeping some saying or keeping some covenant. No, it's just about being in the right bloodline. After 5 centuries, the scribes had won. The Jews couldn't recognize Christ, and they couldn't bear Gentiles. The Pharisees appealing to genealogy in Jesus' day were merely building on the Deuteronomists of Lehi's day. The monotheism of the Deuteronomistic history is nationalistic. Although other gods are assumed to be non-existent, the other nations are not invited to join the Israelites in their worship of Yahweh. That is a quote from Pakala. The first Gentiles who needed to go were the Jaredites, who leave only tiny breadcrumbs in the apocryphal books. In a fuller telling of the Adam and Eve story, the Lord predicts the flood of Noah, and after the flood, the Lord says, quote, "I will deliver what is left of the righteous among them. I will bring them to a distant land, and the land in which you live now shall remain desolate, and without one inhabitant in it." Egyptian Life 53:7. This verse appears to be predicting that Adam and Eve would not live in the same place that Noah would land. Adam and Eve apparently lived in a distant land, distant from Noah's immediate descendants. Also, according to this prophecy, the land vacated by the flood would remain uninhabited. This sounds a lot like the Jaredites coming to an empty continent. The Lord commanded them that they should go forth into the wilderness, yea, into that quarter where there never had man been. That is Ether 2:5. Following the apocryphal second life of Adam and Eve, Adam tells his sons to take his body on the ark during the future great flood, and then to rebury him in the middle of the earth. For the place where my body shall be laid is the middle of the earth. God shall come from thence and shall save all our kindred. Oh, interesting. Really? Adam being buried after the flood. Wow. In summary, there are two locations. The first is where Adam dwells. It is going to be flooded and left desolate and uninhabited. The second location is where Noah will land and rebury the body of Adam. It is distant from the first land. It is also where the Messiah will come from. It is, by deduction, where the Tower of Babel will be built and the Jaredites will flee from, according to the Book of Mormon. The Jaredites will flee from this second location to a mystery place that is uninhabited, and after a long, messy history will be called Land of Desolation by the Nephites. Curiously, when Mosiah II finally translates the Jaredite record, he doesn't use the term Tower of Babel like Genesis does. He instead simply calls it the Great Tower. Later on, Moroni also calls it the Great Tower. The Book of Jasher is keen to point out that the Tower of Babel was not called the Tower of Babel at the time, but only after the languages were confounded. And he called the first Babel, saying, because the Lord there confounded the language of the whole earth. That's Jasher 11:3. The Jaredites would not have been present for the naming of Babel, but would have only known it as a great tower, or as Jasher put it, a great city and a very high and strong tower. Okay, this leads one to believe the brass plates did not contain the history of the Tower of Babel on them, or else the Nephites would have known the name of the place. The only mention of Nimrod in the Book of Mormon authors. I butchered that. The only mention of Nimrod in the Book of Mormon occurs on the Jaredite plates, not among the Nephite records. The Book of Mormon authors pulled their knowledge of the tower from the 24 Jaredite plates translated by Mosiah II around 92 BC. Still, why would this offend the censors so much? Why would these prophecies be left out of the canon? The answer, it's because of the competition. Most people don't know that the Jaredites were contemporaries of Abraham, then called Abram. According to the Book of Ether, the Jaredites originated from the Great Tower at the time the Lord confounded the language of the people. Similarly, the apocryphal Book of Jasher says that Abram was right there too. quote, "In the 48th year of the life of Abram, the son of Terah, and all the days of Peleg were 239 years. And when the Lord had scattered the sons of men on account of their sin at the tower, behold, they spread forth into many divisions, and all the sons of men were dispersed into the four corners of the earth." This apocryphal version of the tower story fits the ether story nicely, as the Jaredites were dispersed into the four corners of the earth. Abraham was an adult right as the Jaredites were packing up and leaving for one of the four corners of the earth. The same Nimrod who built the great tower to heaven also tried to kill Abram as a baby, since the prophecies predicted great things for Abram. The first half of Abram's life was dealing with the same wickedness that the Jaredites escaped from. Like Abram, the Jaredites were so righteous that the Lord spared them his wrath. The Lord was willing to give out promises that day, apparently, because at least 2 men were shepherded away from Babel's destruction. The book of Jasher records details about the Lord's promises to Abram that sound eerily familiar to readers of the book of Ether. Listen how he spoke to Abram and Mahonri Mor Ankamer. We'll say, Abraham this side, Mahonri over there. "Arise now, take thy wife, and all belonging to thee." That's Abraham. To Mahonri, "Go and gather together thy flocks, both male and female, of every kind, and also of the seed of the earth of every kind, and thy families also. And also Jared thy brother and his family, and also thy friends and their families, and their friends of Jared and their families." Ooh, that's a big group. "Abraham, and go to the land of Canaan, and remain there, and I will be unto thee for a God, and I will bless thee." Mahonri, "And when thou hast done this, thou shalt go at the head of them down into the valley, which is northward, and there will I meet thee, and I will go before thee into a land of which is choice above all the lands of the earth." Abram, "And now, therefore, if thou wilt hearken unto my voice, keep my commandments and my statutes and my laws, then will I cause thy enemies to fall before thee, and I will multiply thy seed like the stars of heaven, and I will send my blessing upon all the works of thy hands, and thou shalt lack nothing." Mahonri, "I will forgive thee and thy brethren of their sins, but thou shalt not sin any more, for ye shall remember that my spirit will not always strive with man. Wherefore, if ye will sin, until ye are fully ripe, ye shall be cut off from the presence of the Lord." Abram, "And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed." Mahonri, "And there will I bless thee and thy seed, and raise up unto me of thy seed, and of thy seed, and of the seed of thy brother, and they who shall go with thee, a great nation." It's obvious that the Lord had a clean earth, and he wanted to populate with the right people, and he was eager to make new covenants, but this was not a welcome narrative to the canonizers. The real offensive thing to the editors of the Old Testament was the idea that the Jaredites were going to a land choice above all the lands of the earth, which apparently wasn't the kingdom of Judah, and far worse, that they would be a great nation. "And there shall be none greater than the nation which I will raise up unto me of thy seed upon all the face of the earth." None greater. Not even the kingdom of Judah. This is the Pharisees' kryptonite, the heretical idea that the Hebrews were not racially superior. The Pharisees loved the notion that simply because of their superhuman bloodline, God preferred them. Records like Ether's prove that God was willing to covenant with anyone who would try, and Abrahamic roots wouldn't make up for sour fruit. The Jaredites were the first Gentiles, or non-Hebrews, to be given a try at the covenant, and they kept it for centuries. This wasn't something the canonizers could allow. The Ethiopian Book of Enoch hints at precisely the same thing. The Lord describes the destruction of the flood, and then the replanting of the covenant. Quote, "Destroy all wrong from the face of the earth, and let every evil work come to an end, and let the plant of righteousness and truth appear, and it shall prove a blessing. The works of righteousness and truth shall be planted in truth and joy for evermore. And then shall all the righteous escape, and shall live till they begat thousands of children, and all the days of their youth and their old age shall they complete in peace. And then shall the whole earth be tilled in righteousness, and shall all be planted with trees, and be full of blessing. And all desirable trees shall be planted on it, and they shall plant vines on it, and the vine which they plant thereon shall yield wine in abundance. And as for all the seed which is sown thereon, each measure of it shall bear 1,000, and each measure of olives shall yield 10 presses of oil. 1 Enoch 10, 2-6. Later on, 1 Enoch gives a 1-2 punch, mentioning the inadequacy of the law and the metaphor of the tree. A law shall be made for the sinners, and after that, in the 3rd week at its close, a man shall be elected as the plant of righteous judgment. The book of Jubilees echoes this very motif, as it recounts a blessing of Isaac to Jacob, wherein the old patriarch says, "The Lord might multiply you and increase your seed, as the stars in heaven, in multitude, and establish you on the earth as a plant of righteousness." Sorry, I was just thinking about something. We were reading in Doctrine and Covenants today about signs of the second coming, about the stars of heaven falling, and, the moon turning to blood, and the earth not giving, the sun not giving its shine, and now that could be explained by lunar eclipses, solar eclipses, and meteor showers. And sure, there are specific ones that are either at the right time in the right place, or they are, literal physical things. But with all this talk about increasing your seed as the stars in heaven, it makes me wonder about if those prophecies have to do with the stars falling from heaven being the time of the great apostasy. But we'll see. It just came to mind that what if God is referring... Now, it's a symbol thing. I could be completely wrong and it just may not fit. But what if the stars falling from heaven had to do with the people who are righteous? There not being many of them, either because there's several different references to stars falling from heaven. In Revelations, the third of the host of heaven being drawn down by the dragon. That's one of them. So it could mean people who are righteous, who are children of God, that are no longer being righteous or being killed, if it's meaning that. This is why it would be so important to try to visualize these promises. The Lord doesn't just say things in allegory because it's cool. I think it's meant to stick there. If we were, we think of it as you'll have a whole bunch of children because they'll be as the stars of heaven. But then he uses the same verbiage about stars in heaven falling later on. So could they be the same thing? That's an interesting thought, which could also mean that people just aren't having that many children. If they're not multiplying and replenishing the earth, that they're not becoming like the stars of heaven, well, the stars of heaven will fall. Sorry, that's rattling around up here, and I'm trying to stretch and see how far can that symbolism go, and does it fit? That's interesting. I'll need to pay attention to that more. All right. The book of Jubilee echoes this very motif as the recounted blessing of Jacob. Old patriarch says, the Lord will multiply you and increase your seed as the stars of heaven in the multitude, and establish you on the earth as a plant of righteousness. The Ethiopian Enoch describes the seed of Noah as a plant of righteousness. The Testament of Jacob also compares Israel to a righteous root, saying, blessed are your descendants, for you are my people, and you are of the root of the servants of God. The symbolism is that the house of Israel is like a tree or a plant or a vine. In translating the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs in 1908, R.H. Charles began to notice a bias among the canonizers. It was almost as if the Jewish canonizers had done their editing with resentment toward Josephites. There is throughout the Hebrew Testament a strong personal feeling of hostility to Joseph. Thus his brethren complain that they have been exiled through his being a bondservant in Egypt. Furthermore, not a single word of favor in Joseph's personal character is uttered. On the other hand, in the Greek Testaments, wherever Joseph as an individual is mentioned, he is praised either explicitly or implicitly. Ooh. Perhaps this is why the brothers in Genesis don't show emotion when they're reunited with Joseph. See about the above section of Secret Judah, as early as 1908. Scholars were noticing a tribal bias that had leaked into the canonization process. Josephites were viewed as competition by the insecure scribes of Judah, as were the Jaredites. Now it's obvious why the Jews of Christ's day were so hostile towards the Samaritans. For example, in John 8:48, the Pharisees accused Jesus of being a Samaritan and hast a devil. Xenophobia. With enough time, energy, trail mix, and maybe some depends, anyone can get through the allegory of the olive tree in Jacob 5. I like that allegory, dang it! This chapter purports to be a wholesale insertion of a text from a brass-plate prophet, Zenos, who makes everyone who reaches chapter 6 of Jacob look up and say, what year is it? But his verbosity is not why the scribes hated Zenos. It was because Zenos shows Israel losing the covenant. Only tiny hints of his prophecy remain outside the brass plates. According to an apocryphal document called Pseudo-Philo, there was once a prophet named Zenez or Kenez, and his parting sermon to the people, Zenez relates some hard truths that the Lord had revealed to him. The Lord tells Zenez that the nation of Israel has corrupted its ways, despite how the Lord has toiled over it. The Lord then declares that even before the creation of the world, he planned to, quote, plant a great vineyard, and from it I would choose a plant, and I would care for it and call it by my name, and it would be mine forever. When I did all the things that I said, nevertheless my plant that was called by my name did not recognize me as its planter, but it destroyed its own fruit, and did not yield up its fruit to me. Pseudo-Philo 28:4. Zenez further declares that this isn't the first time that Israel has been told. Its lost prophet Zenez then refers to more lost prophecies. Hear now, you who dwell on the earth, just as those staying a while as on it prophesied before me, and saw this hour even before the earth was corrupted. So all of you who dwell in it may know the prophecies that have been fixed in advance. Pseudo-Philo 28:6. So Pseudo-Philo says this type of prophecy is unpopular and keeps conveniently going missing. For some reason, yeah, these are unpopular, and they keep going missing. Yep. Joseph Smith Jr. somehow guessed that an ancient lost prophet named something like Zenos compared Israel to a tree in a vineyard that would get corrupted, Had Joseph ever made it to Vegas, he'd have cracked the matrix. Even Jesus Christ, when he appears in the flesh, compares the house of Israel to a tree. The Ethiopic apocalypse of Peter purports to be a missing fragment of the conversation the Lord had with his apostles in Matthew 24, which is one chapter Joseph Smith took great pains to retranslate properly. In this fragment, discovered in 1886, the Lord recites a parable to his apostle Peter. The comparison to Zenos's parable in Jacob 5 is striking. I'll do Christ's parable in the Ethiopic apocalypse of Peter, Zenos's parable of the olive tree in Jacob 5. Apocalypse of Peter. Understandest thou not the fig tree is the house of Israel? Zenos. For behold, thus saith the Lord, I will liken thee, O house of Israel, like unto a tame olive tree. Apocalypse of Peter. Even as a man that planted a fig tree in his garden, Zenos, which a man took and nourished in his vineyard. Peter. And it brought forth no fruit, Zenos, and it grew and waxed old and began to decay. Peter. And he sought the fruit thereof many years, when he found it not, Zenos. And he said unto the servant, Look hither, and behold the last. Behold, this I have planted in a good spot of ground, and I have nourished it this long time. And only a part of the tree hath brought forth tame fruit, and the other part of the tree hath brought forth wild fruit. Behold, I have nourished this tree like unto the others. Peter. He said to the keeper of his garden, Root up this fig tree, that it make not our ground be unfruitful. Zenos. And it came to pass that the Lord of the vineyard said unto the servant, Pluck off the branches that have not brought forth good fruit, and cast them into the fire. Peter. And the gardener said unto God, Suffer us to rid it of weeds, and dig the ground round about it, and water it. Zenos. But behold, the servant said unto him, Let us prune it, and dig about it, and nourish it a little longer. Peter. And if it bear not fruit, we will straightway remove its root out of the garden, and plant another in place of it. Zenos. That perhaps it may bring forth good fruit unto thee, that thou canst lay it up against the season. Peter. Hast thou not understood that the fig tree is the house of Israel? Zenos. Behold, this is my prophecy, that the things which this prophet Zenos spake concerning the house of Israel, in the which he likened them unto a tame olive tree. From Moses to Malachi, Christ had a habit of quoting from the writings of the prophets. It appears here that he was quoting from the apocryphal vineyard allegory that compares Israel to a tree. The point of the allegory is that God only cares about the fruits, which means no race or culture is more favored by God than any other. This teaching is why this allegory had to go. All that is left in the canon are whispers and a weird story about Jesus cursing a fig tree. After centuries of Deuteronomists and their ideological descendants, the Pharisees, believing that the covenant was theirs by birthright, John the Baptist, like a boss, came kicking the door down to remind the racist Pharisees. Think not to say within yourselves, We have Abraham to our father, for I say unto you that God is able of these stones to raise up children unto Abraham. And now also the axe is laid unto the root of the tree. Therefore every tree which bringeth forth not good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. Matthew 3:9. If all one ever read was the traditional canon, carefully crafted by the scribes, then one might think John was making up the tree metaphor on his own. But he wasn't. John was paraphrasing Zenos and Enoch, the patriarchs. The scribes had convinced the Jews that their covenant was based on genealogy, i.e. their roots. The tree allegory and the truth about the Gentiles was too unbearable to hear. Quoting Zenos cost John his head. I'm going to call it here. The paranoid sheep is next. Whew. We'll push through on the next one and finish her off. Wow. Okay. I need to remember that I was amazed last time by the two that were mentioned in Revelations in apocryphal works was Elijah and Enoch, which to me is similar to So I looked into it. I did. I looked into the time frame. Elijah was about 900 years, approximately, about 900 years before Christ. So if it was based off of 3.5 days being by God's time, 3,500 years, that would mean that we'd have another 600 years or so. If it's specifically based off of Elijah's death, because Enoch was brought up into heaven. So I don't think that fits very well. I do think that if there are prophets who go and prophesy about the coming of the... Sorry, I'm considering something. 18... Sorry. I'm sitting here thinking about the... Yeah. Huh. Sorry. The idea of prophets that are specifically coming to prepare the way of the Lord would be the spirit of Elijah. And the other is Enoch, being that Zion is coming again. Because, yeah, it's just going to be That's interesting. It makes me wonder what in the world that will be and mean. I'm wearing the shirt that I can't remember if Nathan gave it or Grammy gave it to me. The one that's gun don't kill people. Dads with pretty daughters kill people. It's really interesting though. I'm trying to consider here, like, Jonah is obviously in this section, he's showing all these different prophets and prophecies that were likely a part of the brass plates that even in the New Testament they were quoting, or how other things were taken out. But it's the details of these prophecies that are fascinating to me. And that's true. I never thought of how... Again, I never fully considered the ramifications, because I did know how the Jews of Christ's day, the scribes of Christ's day, were very racist towards Samaritans, and their reasoning was, well, we can trace our blood, and we can do that from the people who came back from Babylon and the people who remained here, and more importantly, not only is it our blood that we've traced, but we've got the pure gospel doctrine. They are some other thing. I am now not viewing the Samaritans in such a bad light, like, at all. I'm wondering if the Samaritans were more like the remnants of Joseph, and them calling them idolaters and mixing their religion with other things. What if it wasn't as mixed with other things as they say? What if that other mixture was the original stuff? The stuff about the Messiah, the stuff about the divine family. It's just really, really interesting to me. The corporeal Messiah is something they couldn't stand. That's also the reason why they would have gotten rid of resurrection, or the idea of resurrection. They wouldn't be able to stand the idea of other nations bearing them up, helping them through, giving them the gospel back, or giving them the covenant back. I mean, if you taught this to Jewish people now, how can you... Like, the Book of Mormon is for the convincing of the Jew and the Gentile. And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, obviously the Jewish people now are not the same as the ones that were scribes of old. But they do have strong traditions still, which is, in my opinion, there's a lot of good things about that. But it makes me sit here and wonder, how could the Book of Mormon teach them that it was always going to be Jesus Christ as the Messiah, and that your people and my people and our people were the ones that we all kept it? That all these things that were said in Isaiah weren't just about the king at the time, Habakkuk or whatever, or not Habakkuk, but Hezekiah. But it was actually about the coming of Jesus Christ. I just sit there and wonder, that is a mental process that I have no clue about. Because I met one guy who was Jewish who joined the Church of Jesus Christ. He had a bunch of health problems. He had a medical device inserted into his abdomen that helped provide medicine to decrease his pain, because he was in such chronic pain all the time. And it was really cool meeting and talking with him. And it's so cool that he joined the church. Unfortunately, I never used the time to sit there and no. I did remember that we asked him, what was it like joining the church, or why did he decide to join the church since he had a Jewish background? And he was basically like, well, looking at it, there's only a few people who could claim true authority from God. One is the Jewish people, one is the Catholics, and one is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he said, what really struck me was how Judaism had become fragmented in all sorts of different directions. So there wasn't really one cohesive main group that showed why and how they had authority. And then he was looking at Catholicism, and I think he was thinking of, or did join them for a brief while, and he's like, that did make sense. Unfortunately, they splintered off into all sorts of different ways and places as well. And again, it was hard to say who had the authority, but the claim that Joseph Smith had the authority and that things were restored made perfect sense to me, that this was the place to be. And sure, there are splinter groups, but the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is still cohesively here and shows and has and emphasizes the authority of God. And that was one of his things. Now, to me, I would think there's a lot of other things that would convince people who are of the Jewish tradition. But I'm trying to figure out what would be the most compelling to them. Because I would think most Jewish people have been like, oh, yeah, Jesus Christ, yeah, I get it, get it, ha, fun, and wouldn't really consider that. But at the same time, it makes me wonder, what would be convincing? Especially if what you have is the Torah and the Old Testament that has been curated and edited to specifically remove the Messiah and remove the very plain and very precious ways of teaching about Jesus Christ. It makes me wonder, how could you convince someone, look, this was your tradition long before. This was the ancient Israelite tradition. This was before Judaism. This was it right here. It was about the Messiah. It was about the redemption of mankind from sin. And that it was preached all throughout time, and even Moses taught it. But it's been curated, it's been ripped out. It was because they wanted you to believe, basically make the law the God instead of God himself God. And so, if you open your eyes to that, you can see that, the law is fine, it's good, it helps people be better to a certain extent, but more importantly, the the rest of the gospel is super, super important. The rest of the good news of Jesus Christ is super important. It was there. It was yours. How do you get someone to believe in something that they're so unfamiliar with? I mean, literally, there are some things that just seem so daunting to me that it's like, it comes down to the Holy Ghost seriously does have to touch their heart and mind. And they have to sit there and go, yeah, no, yeah, I get it. They have to be touched by that same Spirit and go, you know what? Yeah, this makes sense, and I'm willing to change for it. Anyway, that's all I've got for you today. Have a great day, Dad.